Hey guys, tonight we begin with widows burned alive for inheriting property and poisoned by family for refusing remarriage. While you might imagine widowhood meant respected mourning, the reality was women with legal rights so terrifying to men they were killed as witches, murdered for money, and locked away for independence. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture yourself as a widow in England, 1580. You are 32 years old. Your husband died 6 weeks ago, leaving you his entire estate, a house, land, a small income from rents. Under English common law, as a widow you have legal rights that married women don't. You can own property, you can sign contracts, you can conduct business, you can sue and be sued in your own name. You are legally a femme soul, a woman alone, with legal personhood. This should be empowering. You have resources, independence, the ability to support yourself without relying on any man. But instead of celebrating your legal autonomy, society views you with suspicion and fear. You are a woman with power and no man controlling you. You are dangerous. Your late husband's brother visits you. He suggests you should remarry quickly. He has a friend, a merchant, who would make a suitable husband. You decline. You've been married since age 16. You'd like to experience independence before considering remarriage. Your brother-in-law's expression hardens. He tells you that a woman alone is vulnerable, that you need male protection, that refusing to remarry is unnatural. What he doesn't say, but you understand clearly. He wants you remarried to someone he can control, or better yet, he wants to be appointed your legal guardian so he can control your property himself. Your independence threatens his authority and his potential inheritance. If you remain unmarried and die without children, your property goes to your late husband's family. But while you are alive and independent, you control it. This is intolerable to him. Over the following weeks, pressure mounts. Your brother-in-law spreads rumors that you are behaving oddly. He suggests your grief has unhinged your mind. He tells neighbors that you are spending money recklessly, that you are entertaining men inappropriately, that you are not observing proper mourning. None of this is true, but truth doesn't matter. He is building a case for having you declared mentally incompetent so he can take control of your property. You realize you are in danger. You are a woman with property and no husband to protect. You meaning no man to control you. Society doesn't know what to do with you. You have legal rights that threaten the patriarchal order. You must be brought back under male control, one way or another. According to research by historian Dr. Amy Louise Erickson at Cambridge University on women's property rights, in early modern England, widows occupied a unique and threatening position. Unlike married women who were legally covered by their husbands, meaning their legal personhood was subsumed into their husbands, widows had independent legal status. They could own property, control money, make contracts. This made them the only category of adult women with real economic power. This power terrified patriarchal society, which responded with social pressure to remarry, accusations of witchcraft, property seizures, and violence designed to bring independent widows back under male control. Let's examine what legal rights you actually have as a widow and why they're so threatening. Under English common law, when a married woman's husband dies, she is entitled to dower, 1/3 of her husband's estate for her lifetime. This is her legal right meant to prevent destitute widowhood. Additionally, if her husband left a will giving her more than dower, or if she brought property into the marriage that was meant to revert to her upon his death, she might control even more. As a widow, you can own this property outright. It is in your name. You can sell it, lease it, mortgage it, give it away. You can enter into business contracts. If someone owes you money, you can sue them in court in your own name. If someone damages your property, you can seek legal remedy. You have legal agency that married women completely lack, and that unmarried women have only if they've never married. This legal independence is unprecedented for women. For many widows, it is the first time in their lives they've had control over money and property. If you married at 16 and your husband dies when you are 32, you've spent 16 years with no legal personhood. Now suddenly you are a legal person. You can make decisions. You have power. But society is structured on the assumption that women need male guardianship. The entire social, economic and legal system is built on men controlling women, women controlling themselves, controlling property, money. Business threatens this structure. If women can manage property successfully, if they can conduct business, if they can survive and even thrive without male control, then what justification exists for denying married women these rights? What justification exists for the entire patriarchal system? Widows answer this question by their mere existence. You, as a widow managing your property competently, prove that women are capable of legal and economic independence. This is why you are dangerous. Not because you are actually doing anything wrong, but because your success threatens the ideological foundation of patriarchy. According to research by historian Dr. Barbara Todd at the University of Toronto on widows in early modern England, society responded to this threat with enormous pressure on widows to remarry. Remarriage eliminated the problem. Once remarried, a woman's property came under her new husband's control, and she reverted to legal coverture, non-personhood. The speed and intensity with which widows were pressured to remarry reveals how threatening female economic independence was to patriarchal society. A widow who refused to remarry was refusing to give up her power, her independence, her legal personhood. This refusal was seen as unnatural, suspect, and requiring intervention. Let's examine the specific case of Alice Catella, one of the most famous widows accused of witchcraft. Alice was born in Ireland around 1280 into a wealthy family. She married 4 times. Each of her first 3 husbands died, leaving her their property. By the time her 4th husband died, Alice was one of the wealthiest people in Kilkenny, Ireland. She owned houses, land, businesses. She was economically powerful. Alice's children from her first 3 marriages inherited substantial wealth, but her 4th husband's children, her stepchildren, felt cheated. They believed Alice had manipulated their father into leaving her everything. They couldn't accept that a woman could legitimately accumulate such wealth. There must be something unnatural about it. In 1324, Alice's stepchildren and her 4th husband's relatives accused her of witchcraft. They claimed she had murdered her first 3 husbands using poison and sorcery. They claimed she had used witchcraft to seduce her 4th husband and control his mind, forcing him to disinherit his children in her favour. They claimed she had sexual relations with a demon who gave her supernatural power and wealth. The accusations were clearly motivated by property disputes. Alice's accusers wanted her wealth. But witchcraft accusations were an effective way to seize a wealthy widow's property. If convicted of witchcraft, Alice would be executed and her property would be forfeit to the church and crown. Her accusers would then claim inheritance rights. Alice was brought to trial. The case against her was built on her wealth. The fact that she was rich despite being a woman was presented as evidence of supernatural assistance. Her business acumen was interpreted as unnatural cunning. Her survival of 4 husbands was presented as evidence she'd murdered them. Everything about her success was reframed as proof of witchcraft. Alice had resources to fight back. She had money for lawyers. She had powerful friends. She used her influence to delay and complicate the proceedings. Eventually, she fled Ireland, escaping to England where she disappeared from historical records. She saved her life but lost everything: her property, her home, her position in society. One of Alice's servants, Petronella de Meath, wasn't so fortunate. Petronella was accused of being Alice's accomplice in witchcraft. She had no resources to defend herself. She was tortured until she confessed to helping Alice with sorcery and demonic rituals. Petronella was burned alive in 1324, the first person executed for witchcraft in Ireland. She died because her employer was a wealthy widow whose success threatened powerful men, according to research by historian Dr. Maeve Brigid Callan on the Alice Ketela case. The accusations against Alice followed a pattern common in witchcraft cases. A woman with unusual wealth or independence was accused of supernatural evil. The witchcraft accusation provided a mechanism for seizing wealthy widows' property, while justifying it as protecting society from demonic evil. Alice's case wasn't about actual witchcraft. It was about powerful men trying to regain control over property that a woman held. Let's examine the specific pressures you face as a young widow. You are 25 years old, widowed after only 2 years of marriage. You have no children. Your husband left you his property modest but sufficient to support you. You are young, healthy, capable of remarrying and having children. Society expects you to remarry quickly. Your family pressures you to remarry. Your parents suggest suitable men who would benefit your family through alliance, or men your father owes favors to. Your late husband's family pressures you to marry one of his brothers, keeping the property in the family through a levirate-like arrangement. Neighbors, friends, your priest, everyone has opinions about whom you should marry and how quickly. The pressure is relentless. You are told that a young woman living alone is immoral. People suspect you'll take lovers, become a prostitute, disgrace yourself. You are told that you need male protection. You are vulnerable to robbery, assault, seduction. You are told that refusing to remarry is selfish. You should provide an heir for your late husband's family. You should give your father the political alliance a good marriage would bring. But you don't want to remarry. You've experienced being married, being legally controlled by a husband, having no say over your own life. Now you have independence. You have property. You can make your own decisions. You are not eager to give that up. Your refusal to remarry is interpreted as unnatural. Women are supposed to want marriage, to want to be protected and controlled by men. Your desire for independence suggests something is wrong with you. Are you sexually deviant? Are you mentally unbalanced? Are you unnaturally masculine? Your perfectly rational desire for autonomy is pathologized as evidence of defect. The pressure escalates. If gentle persuasion doesn't work, coercion begins. Your family might threaten to disown you. Your late husband's family might bring legal challenges to your inheritance. Creditors your late husband owed might suddenly demand immediate payment, trying to force you into financial crisis that would require you to marry for economic support. Men might court you aggressively, might even attempt to abduct and rape you. Forced consummation, creating a situation where you'd have to marry to avoid scandal. Some young widows eventually remarry because the pressure is unbearable. Others hold out, maintaining their independence despite social ostracism. Your choice: remarry and lose your autonomy, or remain single and fight constant social and economic pressure, is fundamentally about whether women can be allowed to exist as independent legal persons. According to research by historian Dr. Vivian Brodsky on widows in early modern London, young widows faced particularly intense pressure to remarry. Their youth and childbearing potential made them valuable marriage prospects. But many young widows resisted remarriage, especially if they'd inherited sufficient property to support themselves. These women valued their independence, the ability to control their own lives, property, and bodies, over the social approval that remarriage would bring. Their resistance to remarriage was resistance to returning to legal non-personhood. Let's examine the case of Anne Clifford, Countess of Dorset, Pembroke, and Montgomery, whose decades-long legal battle to claim her inheritance made her one of the most famous widows in English history. Anne was born in 1590, the only surviving child of George Clifford, 3rd Earl of Cumberland, When her father died in 1605, Anne expected to inherit his estates in Yorkshire and Westmoreland, but her father's will left everything to his brother instead, bypassing Anne. The will claimed this was legitimate because Anne was female. Her father didn't want his estates going to Anne's husband. He wanted them staying in the male Clifford line. Anne was given a small financial settlement instead of the vast estates that should have been hers. Anne refused to accept this. She believed the estates were rightfully hers. She began a legal battle that would last 38 years. She refused lucrative settlement offers. Her uncle, then her male cousins, offered her substantial money if she'd drop her claim to the estates. Anne refused. She wanted what was legally and morally hers, the estates themselves. Anne's first husband, Richard Sackville, Earl of Dorset, pressured her to accept a settlement. He wanted the money. He needed it to pay his debts. Anne refused. The estates weren't his to bargain with. They were hers. Her refusal created terrible tension in the marriage. Richard tried to control her, to force her to give up her claim. Anne resisted. When Richard died in 1624, Anne was briefly a widow free to pursue her claim without a husband interfering. But she remarried in 1630 to Philip Herbert, Earl of Pembroke and Montgomery. Philip also pressured her about the estates. He wanted to control her property. Anne continued to refuse. Anne didn't win her estates until 1643, after her uncle and his son both died without male heirs. The estates finally reverted to Anne, now 53 years old. She had fought for 38 years. As a widow, Philip had died in 1650. She spent her final decades managing the estates herself, restoring castles, managing tenants, ensuring the properties stayed in her line. Anne's case is remarkable for her persistence. She fought her father's will, 2 husbands, her uncle, her male cousins, and legal precedent that favoured male heirs. She refused to accept that being female disqualified her from inheritance. She valued her rights over social pressure and financial incentives. Her widowhood finally gave her the freedom to fully control her property without a husband interfering. According to research by historian Dr. Richard T. Spence on Anne Clifford's life, her story demonstrates both the possibilities and limitations of female property ownership in early modern England. Anne had strong legal grounds for her claim, but enforcing those rights against male relatives took decades. Her ability to persist was partly due to her high social rank and resources. Lower-class women couldn't afford 38-year legal battles. Anne's widowhood was crucial. As a widow, she had legal standing to pursue her claims and no husband controlling her decisions. Her case shows how widowhood could provide women with agency that was impossible while married. Let's examine the connection between widowhood and witchcraft accusations more deeply. You are a 60-year-old widow in a small English village in 1645. You've been widowed for 10 years. You live alone in a small cottage. You have a bit of land, a few animals, enough to survive. You are independent, self-sufficient, and this is crucial. You have no man to speak for you or protect you. The village has experienced crop failures. Several children have died of fever. Cattle are sick. The community needs someone to blame for these misfortunes. You become the target. You are a widow living alone. Already suspect. You are old post-menopausal women are seen as unnatural, having lost their feminine purpose. You have property modest though it is, someone would benefit from taking it. You are argumentative. You've had disputes with neighbours over boundary lines and stray animals. You are perfect scapegoat material. Rumours begin. Someone saw you talking to your cat, probably your familiar spirit. Someone noticed your neighbour's cow died after you argued with him. Obviously you cursed it. Someone's child got sick after you looked at it strangely. The evil eye. None of this is evidence of anything except normal life in a small village, but it is reinterpreted as witchcraft. You are accused formally. As a widow, you have no husband to defend you or vouch for your character. Your children, if you have any, might be afraid to support you. Being associated with an accused witch endangers them. Your neighbours testify against you, either because they believe the accusations, or because they're afraid not to, or because they see an opportunity to settle old grudges. The trial is a nightmare. Everything about you is evidence of witchcraft. You live alone, witches are solitary. You have a cat familiars. You know herbal remedies, poison and potions. You are argumentative and don't show proper deference to authority. Witches are prideful. You are poor but haven't begged supernatural assistance. You are old and ugly. Witches are always old hags. There is no defence. Being a widow living independently, having no man to control or vouch for you. All of this is suspicious. You are convicted. You might be hanged or burned, depending on the jurisdiction. Your property is forfeit. It goes to the crown or the local lord, or it is divided among those who accused you. Your modest independence, your stubborn survival as a woman alone, has made you a target. Witchcraft accusations provided a legal mechanism to eliminate independent women and seize their property. According to research by historian Dr. Malcolm Gaskill at the University of East Anglia on English witchcraft accusations, widows were dramatically overrepresented among accused witches. Being a widow was a significant risk factor for accusation. Widows lived independently, had no male protector, often had property that others coveted and didn't fit into patriarchal family structures. Communities targeted widows when looking for witches because widows were already socially marginal and economically vulnerable despite their legal rights. The witchcraft accusation transformed the widow's legal independence from a right into evidence of supernatural evil. Let's examine wealthy widows in more detail. Women whose substantial inheritances made them particularly threatening and vulnerable. You are Lady Frances Howard, widowed in 1626. Your husband Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford, has died leaving you immensely wealthy. You own multiple estates, substantial income from rents, investments, jewels, plate. You are one of the wealthiest women in England. You are 35 years old. Beautiful, wealthy, and legally independent. You could remarry anyone. You'd be an incredibly valuable marriage prospect. Men court you aggressively. Some want your money. Some want the political connections your wealth brings. Some genuinely find you attractive, though it is impossible to separate sincere affection from desire for your fortune. But you don't want to remarry. You've been married since age 13, over 20 years of being controlled by a husband. Now you are free. You have money, property, freedom to do what you want. Why would you voluntarily return to coverture, to legal non-existence, to having a husband control everything you own? Your family pressures you to remarry. A good remarriage would benefit them. They'd gain powerful in-laws, political alliances, possibly financial benefits. Your late husband's family also pressures you. They'd like you to marry someone who would be favourable to their interests. The king might pressure you. Your remarriage could be used to reward loyal courtiers or cement political alliances. Your remarriage isn't just your personal business. It is a political matter because of your wealth. You resist all pressure. You remain unmarried. You manage your estates yourself. You make business decisions. You appear at court as an independent noblewoman, not as someone's wife. You are living proof that women can manage vast wealth competently without male control. This makes you threatening. Other women see your example and wonder why they can't have similar independence. Your success managing property undermines claims that women are intellectually incapable of business. Your refusal to remarry suggests women might value autonomy over the security of male protection. You are dangerous. You face subtle and not so subtle attempts to undermine you. Male administrators try to cheat you in business dealings, assuming you are ignorant. Relatives bring legal challenges to your inheritance. claiming irregularities in your late husband's will. Rumors spread about your morality. A woman who doesn't remarry must be taking lovers, must be sexually promiscuous. Your competence is reinterpreted as unfeminine ruthlessness. Your independence is reframed as unnatural unwomanliness. But you have resources to fight back. You have money for excellent lawyers. You have social connections. You have the confidence that comes from aristocratic upbringing. You maintain your independence despite all opposition, living as one of the few truly autonomous women in England. According to research by historian Dr. Barbara Harris on aristocratic widows in Tudor and Stuart England, wealthy widows had opportunities for independence that other women lacked but also faced unique pressures. Their wealth made them valuable marriage prospects and targets for fortune hunters. Their independence threatened the assumption that women needed male control. Many wealthy widows chose not to remarry, valuing their autonomy over the social approval remarriage would bring. These women managed vast estates successfully, proving that women's supposed incapacity for business was ideological rather than factual. Let's examine the case of Bess of Hardwicke, one of the most successful and powerful women in Elizabethan England through strategic widowhood. Bess was born around 1527 to a minor gentry family. She married 4 times. Each marriage left her wealthier when her husband died. By her 4th widowhood, Bess was one of the richest people in England, second only to Queen Elizabeth I herself. Bess's first marriage at age 15 was to Robert Barley, who died when Bess was about 16, leaving her a small amount of property. Her second marriage to William Cavendish was more lucrative. They built a fortune together through estate management and property speculation. When William died, Bess inherited substantial wealth. Bess's third marriage to William St. Lo brought more property. When he died, his entire estate went to Bess rather than to his brother and other relatives, causing family fury. Bess's 4th marriage to George Talbot, Earl of Shrewsbury, was politically advantageous, but the marriage was unhappy. George resented Bess's business dealings and her focus on enriching her Cavendish children from her second marriage. When George died in 1590, Bess was 63 and finally free. She spent her widowhood building literally. She completed Hardwicke Hall, one of the most magnificent houses in England, a statement of her power and independence. She managed vast estates across multiple counties. She arranged advantageous marriages for her children and grandchildren. She lived until 1608, dying at about 81 years old, having spent 18 years of powerful, independent widowhood. Bess was controversial. She was called ambitious, ruthless, grasping. Her accumulation of wealth was seen as unseemly in a woman. Her business acumen was considered masculine. Her survival of 4 husbands was occasionally whispered about. Though no formal accusations of murder were made, rumours persisted that something unnatural explained her repeated widowhoods. She was too successful, too powerful, too independent to be acceptable, but Bess had the resources and strength of personality to withstand criticism. She used her widowhood strategically. Each widowhood was a period of independence between marriages, where she consolidated her wealth and power. Her final widowhood was her triumph, nearly 2 decades of building, managing, and wielding power as an independent woman. According to research by historian Dr. Mary S. Lovell on Bess of Hardwicke's life, Bess used the legal opportunities widowhood provided to build extraordinary wealth and power. She understood that widowhood gave her legal rights married women lacked. She used those rights aggressively to accumulate and manage property. Her success challenged assumptions about women's capabilities, but it also provoked hostility. Society didn't know what to do with a woman as powerful as Bess. Her widowhood made her power possible, but it also made her a target for criticism and attempts to undermine her. Let's examine what happens when you are a widow who remarries and how your second marriage differs from your first. You are 30 years old, widowed with 3 young children. You have moderate property from your late husband, enough to support you and your children, but managing it while raising children alone is difficult. After 2 years of widowhood, you decide to remarry. Your second marriage is different from your first. You married your first husband at 16. You were young, inexperienced, had no idea what marriage would be like. This time you are older. You've been married before. You understand what you are agreeing to. You've also experienced widowhood. You know what it is like to have legal independence, to control your own property. You are reluctant to give that up. You negotiate with your prospective second husband before marriage. You want protections for your children. You need to ensure they inherit their father's property rather than everything going to your new husband. You use your knowledge and your bargaining power. You are a desirable match. You bring property. You are proven fertile. You can manage a household. To negotiate a marriage settlement that protects your interests. The marriage settlement stipulates that your children's inheritance is held in trust, separate from your new husband's control. You retain separate property. Your dower from your first husband remains yours. You negotiate rights to dispose of your property by will. If you die, your property goes where you designate, not automatically to your second husband. These negotiations are unusual. Most women marry young and have no bargaining power, but as a widow you have experience and legal standing. You can refuse to marry unless terms are acceptable. This gives you leverage that young first-time brides lack. Your second husband agrees to your terms, though he is not happy about them. He expected to control all property brought into the marriage, as husbands typically do. Your insistence on protecting your children's inheritance and maintaining separate property frustrates him. It suggests you don't fully trust him, which is true. You've learned that men die, that marriages end, that women need to protect themselves and their children. After the wedding, you navigate the complicated reality of being married but maintaining some independence. Your marriage settlement gives you more autonomy than most wives have, but you are still covered by coverture. Legally, your husband has authority over you. The tension between your legal subordination and your practical power creates constant friction. Your husband resents your independence. You resent his attempts to control property that is meant to be separate. Your second marriage is a constant negotiation of power. According to research by historian Dr. Amy Freud on remarrying widows, women who remarried after widowhood often negotiated marriage settlements that protected their interests and their children's inheritances. These women had experience, legal standing, and bargaining power that young first-time brides lacked. They used these advantages to create more equitable marriages, but remarriage still meant returning to coverture and losing the legal independence widowhood provided. Many widows remarried for practical reasons: economic support, help raising children, social respectability, but they often did so reluctantly, knowing they were trading independence for security. Let's examine the specific vulnerability of widows to violence and coercion. You are a 40-year-old widow living in London in 1670. You own a small shop that your late husband built. You've been running it successfully for 2 years since his death. You have modest but steady income. You are self-sufficient. A man begins courting you. He is charming at first. He flatters you, tells you you are beautiful, suggests he could help with your business. You are lonely widow. Hood is isolating, so you welcome his attention, though you are not interested in remarrying. His courtship becomes more aggressive. He starts showing up at your shop without invitation. He makes suggestions about how you should run your business, suggestions that would benefit him financially. When you politely decline his advice and his marriage proposals, he becomes angry. He tells you that you need a husband, that a woman can't manage a business alone, that you are being foolish and stubborn. One night he breaks into your shop. He assaults you, pins you down, tries to rape you. You fight back, screaming. Neighbours hear and intervene. He is driven off, but the damage is done. You are traumatized, terrified, aware that you are vulnerable. You try to bring charges against him, but the legal system doesn't take your complaint seriously. He is a man, you are a woman. He claims you invited him, that you led him on, that you are a widow and therefore sexually available. Your protests that you refused him, that he broke in, that he attacked you. All of this is dismissed. A widow living alone, running a business, of course, men assume you are sexually available. Your independence is interpreted as sexual invitation. The assault has accomplished its purpose even though it wasn't completed. You are terrified to live alone now. You are afraid he'll return. You consider remarrying simply for physical protection. This is exactly what he wanted, to terrorize you into accepting his marriage proposal or some other man's. Your economic independence means nothing if you are not physically safe, and society offers widows minimal protection against male violence. Some widows who resist marriage proposals or who refuse to surrender property are found dead. Sometimes it is clearly murder. Sometimes it is suspicious circumstances, falls downstairs, drownings, fires. Widows with property are valuable dead as well as married. If you die, your property might revert to your late husband's family, or might be claimed by creditors, or might be seized by whoever can manufacture a legal claim. Your life stands between valuable property and men who want it. This makes you expendable. According to research by historian Dr. Garthine Walker on women and violence in early modern England, widows were particularly vulnerable to violence and coercion. Their independence and property made them targets. Sexual assault was used as a tool to coerce widows into marriage. Forced consummation created situations where marriage was necessary to avoid scandal. Widows who resisted marriage proposals or property claims sometimes disappeared or died in suspicious circumstances. Society provided minimal protection for widows against male violence, viewing widows as responsible for their own victimization through their refusal to remarry and accept male protection. Let's examine the case of Catherine Ferrers, known as the Wicked Lady, whose story, though partly legendary, illustrates fears about independent widows. Catherine was born in 1634 in Hertfordshire, England. She inherited the Marquette-Cell estate as a child when her father died. She was married at age 14 to Thomas Fanshawe, a marriage arranged to consolidate property. According to legend, and the historical reality is murky, Catherine was unhappy in her marriage. Thomas was away frequently on business. Catherine, managing the estate, supposedly became a highwaywoman, robbing travellers on the roads around Hertfordshire. She dressed as a man, rode out at night, held up coaches at gunpoint. She was the Wicked Lady, a female criminal defying every rule about proper feminine behaviour. Catherine died at age 26 in 1660. The cause is unclear. One legend says she was shot during a robbery and died of her wounds. Another story suggests she died in childbirth or illness. Historical records are sparse, but the legends about Catherine persisted for centuries. She became a folk figure, the aristocratic woman turned criminal, the lady who rejected feminine propriety for masculine adventure and violence. Why did Catherine's legend persist? Because she represented deep-seated fears about independent women. If women weren't controlled by men, if they had property and freedom, what would stop them from becoming criminals? Catherine supposedly used her widow's independence. She was effectively a widow with Thomas, often absent, to become a violent criminal. This confirmed that women needed male control. Without it, they'd become wicked ladies, threatening social order. The historical Catherine probably wasn't a highwaywoman, but the legend reveals cultural anxieties. An independent woman with property was imaginable as a criminal because she'd already violated feminine norms by being independent. The step from independence to criminality seemed small in the cultural imagination. Widows with freedom were just one step away from complete social chaos. According to research by historian Dr. Charlotte Hallows on Catherine Ferrers and female criminals, Legends about criminal women, like the Wicked Lady, reflected anxieties about women's independence. These stories imagined what women might do if freed from male control. They'd become violent, criminal, destructive. The persistence of such legends into modern times shows how deeply threatening the idea of female independence was to patriarchal society. Catherine Ferrers became a cautionary tale. This is what happens when women aren't controlled by men. Whether or not the real Catherine was a criminal, the legend served to justify male control over women. Let's examine poor widows, woman whose widowhood brought legal rights but no economic security. You are a 38-year-old widow in a small English village in 1620. Your husband was a labourer. He died leaving you nothing. He had no property to leave, just debts. You have 4 children under age 10. You are legally independent, but economically desperate. As a widow, you can work in your own name, make contracts, sue for wages owed. But employment opportunities are limited. Most work available to women pays starvation wages. You might do spinning, washing, gleaning in fields after harvest, casual labour. You work constantly but can barely feed your children. The parish provides some relief. You are entitled to poor relief as a widow with children, but the amount is minimal and comes with conditions. The parish overseers monitor your behaviour. If you are seen drinking, if you are accused of sexual immorality, if you are deemed undeserving, your relief can be cut off. You are dependent on the charity of a community that resents supporting you. The parish pressures you to remarry. A married woman is her husband's responsibility. Not the parish's parish officials suggest suitable men. Other poor labourers, often men no one else wants to marry. Old men, disabled men, men with terrible reputations. You are expected to accept anyone who will take you and your children off the parish's hands. But remarrying means giving up your legal independence and, more importantly, putting your children at risk. A stepfather might abuse your children. He'd have legal authority over them. He could beat them, force them to work, sexually abuse your daughters, all legally. You've heard horror stories about stepfathers. You are reluctant to remarry unless you are certain the man will treat your children well. Your refusal to remarry makes you unpopular. The parish sees you as a burden. Neighbours resent their taxes supporting you. You are accused of being too proud, too particular. How dare you reject marriage proposals when you are dependent on charity? Your insistence on protecting your children is reinterpreted as stubborn refusal to do your duty by remarrying and removing yourself from parish support. You live in constant poverty and anxiety. You have legal rights but no practical power. Your widowhood gives you autonomy that means nothing when you are starving. You are trapped between the dangers of desperate poverty and the dangers of remarrying someone who might harm your children. According to research by historian Dr. Judith Bennett on poor women in medieval and early modern England, poor widows were legally independent, but economically desperate. They had the same legal rights as wealthy widows. They could own property, make contracts, sue in their own names. But without property, these rights were largely theoretical. Poor widows relied on charity, low-wage work and their own resourcefulness to survive. Communities pressured poor widows to remarry to remove them from parish poor relief roles. But widows often resisted remarriage to protect their children from potentially abusive stepfathers. These women's widowhood was dangerous freedom. They had autonomy but no security. Let's examine the specific case of the Pendle witches, where several accused were widows. In 1612, in Lancashire, England, a massive witch hunt resulted in the trial of 20 people, most of them women, many of them widows. The core families involved, the Demdikes and the Chattoxes, were headed by elderly widow matriarchs. Elizabeth Southerners, known as Old Demdike, and Anne Whittle, known as Old Chattox, were the primary accused. Both women were elderly widows, probably in their 70s or 80s. Both lived in extreme poverty. Both had reputations as cunning women people who practiced folk magic, healing, and fortune telling for small payments. In their communities, they were simultaneously feared and utilized. People sought their services, but also blamed them when things went wrong. The witch hunt began with accusations from a local family. Several Demdikes and Chattoxes were accused of witchcraft, of cursing neighbours, causing deaths, meeting with the devil. The accusations followed familiar patterns: elderly widows living in poverty, with reputations for magical knowledge, no male protectors, easy scapegoats when the community needed someone to blame for misfortunes. At trial, the accused were pressured to confess and to accuse others. Old Demdike died in prison before trial. Old Chattox was tried and convicted. In total, 10 people were hanged, most of them women, several of them widows. Their property, such as it was forfeit. Their families were destroyed. The Pendle witch trials show how widowhood, poverty, and old age created vulnerability to witchcraft accusations. Elderly widows with knowledge of folk medicine and magic were valuable to their communities, but also threatening. When communities needed scapegoats, these women were expendable. Their widowhood meant they had no husbands to defend them. Their poverty meant they had no resources to fight accusations. Their age meant they were past childbearing, and thus had no social value. They could be eliminated without social cost. According to research by historian Dr. Robert Poole on the Pendle witch trials, the accused witches were almost all women on the margins of society, elderly, poor, widowed, alone. Their marginal status made them vulnerable. The witch hunt served multiple purposes. It provided scapegoats for community misfortunes. It eliminated women who were economic burdens on the community, and it reinforced social norms by punishing women who lived outside patriarchal family structures. Widowhood was a significant risk factor for witchcraft accusation because widows lived independently, had no male protection, and didn't fit into the household-based social order. Let's examine widows accused of murdering their husbands, a common fear that followed women into widowhood. You are 35 years old. Your husband has just died after a brief illness. You nursed him through his final days. You are exhausted, grieving, and relieved. Your marriage was unhappy. Your husband was sometimes abusive. And while you didn't wish him dead, his death has freed you from a difficult situation. Within days of his death, rumors begin. People whisper that you poisoned him. Why? Because you were seen buying certain herbs from an apothecary, because you were the one preparing his food during his illness, because you seem insufficiently grief-stricken, because you are young enough to remarry, and everyone assumes you wanted your husband dead so you could marry someone else, because you are a woman who benefits from your husband's death, and society assumes women who benefit must have caused it. Your husband's family demands an investigation. His brother insists the body be examined. A surgeon is called to conduct an autopsy, cutting open your late husband's body to search for evidence of poison. This is traumatic to watch your husband's body desecrated, his organs examined, all while you are accused of murdering him. The surgeon finds nothing conclusive. The symptoms your husband displayed before death could be poison, but they could also be natural illness. In the absence of clear evidence, the determination often depends on your reputation. Are you a good woman, submissive, properly grieving, without suspicion of adultery? Or are you a bad woman, outspoken, insufficiently mournful, rumoured to have male friends? If suspicion is strong enough, you might be charged with petty treason. Murdering a husband isn't just murder. It is treason, because wives owe husbands the same obedient subjects owe kings. The penalty for petty treason is burning alive. You could be burned at the stake for a crime you didn't commit, based on nothing more than rumour, and the fact that you benefited from your husband's death. Even if you are not charged, the rumour follows you. You are suspected of husband murder. This makes remarriage difficult. What man wants to marry a woman suspected of poisoning her first husband? It makes employment difficult. Who wants to hire a woman who might be a murderer? You are marked forever by suspicion. your widowhood tainted by accusations. You can never fully escape. The fear of widows poisoning husbands was pervasive in early modern Europe. Medical knowledge was limited. Many illnesses looked like poisoning. Women prepared food and nursed sick family members, giving them opportunity to poison. Women who inherited property after husbands' deaths had motive. These factors combined to make widow poisoning a constant cultural anxiety. Many women were accused, some were executed. All widows lived under this shadow of suspicion. According to research by historian Dr. Francis Dolan on dangerous familiars in early modern England, fears about wives murdering husbands reflected anxieties about women's power within the household. Women who prepared food had daily opportunities to poison. The intimacy of marriage gave wives access to husbands in their most vulnerable moments. If wives wanted to kill husbands, they could. This terrified patriarchal society. Witchcraft accusations and husband murder accusations often overlapped. Both reflected fears of women's hidden power, their ability to harm men from positions of apparent subordination. Widows who'd benefited from husbands' deaths were automatically suspect because their widowhood itself was evidence they might have caused it. Let's examine widows' businesses. How women used widowhood to establish economic independence. You are a 42-year-old widow in London, 1680. Your late husband was a printer. He taught you the trade. You worked alongside him for 20 years. When he dies, you inherit the printing business. As a widow, you can operate the business in your own name. You are admitted to your late husband's guild as a widow member. You can take on apprentices, fulfill contracts, publish books. You have legitimate professional standing that married women and unmarried women don't have. Your widowhood has given you economic opportunity. You throw yourself into the business. You are good at it. You've been doing this work for 20 years. You maintain your late husband's clients. You take on new work. You publish political pamphlets, religious texts, popular literature. Your business prospers. You are economically independent, professionally respected, successful. But you face constant challenges. Male printers resent your competition. They complain to the guild that you are taking work that should go to men with families to support. They argue that printing is too physically demanding for a woman. They spread rumours that you are not actually doing the work yourself, that you must have a male lover who is the real printer while you take credit. Your guild membership is contested. Some guild members argue that widows should be allowed to finish ongoing contracts, but not take new work, and certainly not take on new apprentices. They want to limit widows' professional activities to maintain male control of the trade. You fight these attempts, asserting your rights as a guild member. Your success challenges assumptions about women's capabilities. You are running a complex business, managing workers, negotiating contracts, maintaining equipment, making business decisions. You are proving that women can do this work successfully. This threatens the ideological justification for excluding women from professional trades. If widows can run businesses, why can't other women? Your success is dangerous to patriarchal economic structures. Some male professionals try to force you to remarry. They suggest suitable husbands, men who work in the printing trade who could take over your business. They frame this as concern for you. A woman shouldn't have to work so hard. You need a husband to help you. It is not proper for a woman to run a business alone. But you recognize this as an attempt to bring your business back under male control. Once remarried, your business would legally belong to your husband. Your remarriage would eliminate the threat you pose. You remain unmarried and continue running your business. You face hostility and professional obstacles, but you persist. You value your independence, your ability to control your work, your income, your life, more than social approval or security of remarriage. You are living proof that women can be economically independent, and you are not giving that up. According to research by historian Dr. Natasha Glazier on women in business in early modern London, widows operated businesses across many trades: printers, brewers, shopkeepers, craftspeople. These women had legal rights to conduct business that married women lacked. Many were successful, maintaining businesses their husbands had built or even expanding them. But they faced persistent opposition from male guild members who saw them as competition and as threats to male dominance of trades. Guilds gradually restricted widows' rights over the 17th and 18th centuries, making it harder for widows to maintain professional standing. The successful widow businesswoman was too threatening to be tolerated. She proved women's economic competence and undermined justifications for excluding women from professional life. Let's examine the case of Margaret Catchpole, whose story as a widow illustrates the vulnerability of working-class widows in the late 18th century. Margaret was born in Suffolk, England in 1762. She worked as a domestic servant and nurse. She married and was widowed young, left alone to support herself through domestic work. Margaret fell in love with William Lord, a sailor who was involved in smuggling. When William was pressed into naval service, Margaret tried desperately to reach him. In 1797, she stole a horse to ride to London to find William, a crime, and horse theft was a capital offence. Margaret was caught, tried, and sentenced to death. Her sentence was commuted to transportation to Australia, 7 years hard labour in the penal colony. In 1800, Margaret arrived in New South Wales. She was assigned to work for settlers as a convict servant. She proved valuable. Her nursing skills were desperately needed in the colony where medical care was scarce. In 1801, Margaret received a conditional pardon. She was free within the colony but couldn't return to England. She worked as a nurse and midwife, highly respected for her skills. She established herself successfully, becoming a property owner and respected community member. She never saw William again. He died at sea. Margaret died in 1819 in Australia, having built a new life after transportation. Margaret's story shows both the vulnerability and resilience of widows. As a poor widow, she was economically desperate, which pushed her toward crime. The legal system showed her no mercy. She was sentenced to death for horse theft, a sentence rarely imposed on men of higher class. Transportation saved her life but exiled her permanently from England. In Australia, she used her widowhood and the skills she developed to build independence. She could work as a nurse, own property, make her own decisions. Rights that, ironically, transportation to a brutal penal colony granted her more securely than England had. According to research by historian Dr. Joy Damusi on women transported to Australia, many transported women were poor widows or single women who'd committed property crimes out of economic desperation. In England, they'd been marginalised and impoverished. In Australia, the shortage of women and the need for domestic and nursing skills gave some transported women opportunities they'd never had in England. Some built successful lives in the colony, using skills and determination to create independence. Margaret Catchpole exemplified this. Transported as a criminal, she became a respected medical practitioner and property owner, achieving in exile the independence she'd lacked as a poor widow in England. Let's examine elderly widows, women whose age combined with widowhood to make them particularly vulnerable. You are 68 years old, widowed for 12 years. You live alone in a small cottage. You have a tiny income from your widow's dower, barely enough to survive. You have adult children, but they have their own families and limited resources to support you. Your age makes you socially invisible. Post-menopausal women are seen as having outlived their usefulness. You are no longer capable of childbearing, the supposed primary purpose of women. You are old, probably ugly by conventional standards, past any sexual attractiveness. Society has no use for you, but you do have something valuable, your cottage and your small income. Your children would inherit when you die. They're waiting for your death, not eagerly but practically. Your survival is inconvenient. You are consuming resources they could use. If you die, they inherit. If you live another decade, you are a drain on family resources and a delay on their inheritance. Your children suggest you might be happier living with one of them. You'd give up your cottage. They'd sell it and divide the money. You'd live in their home, helping with housework and childcare in exchange for room and board. This sounds like family care, but you recognize it as a loss of independence. Once you give up your cottage, you have no home of your own, no ability to leave if you are mistreated, complete dependence on children who might resent supporting you. You refuse. You want to die in your own home, maintaining your independence as long as possible. Your children are frustrated. They suggest you are not capable of living alone. You are old, forgetful. What if you fall and no one finds you for days? They claim concern for your welfare, but you suspect concern for the property you are occupying. Neighbors view you with suspicion. You are an old woman living alone, probably a witch. You mutter to yourself. You are lonely, and talking to yourself is company. You have a cat. It is companionship and catches mice. You know herbal remedies. You've been treating your own ailments for decades. All of this is normal for an elderly widow, but it is also characteristics associated with witches. When misfortunes occur in the village, you are a convenient scapegoat. You are socially marginal. You have no husband or young children who depend on you. You are past childbearing. So eliminating you doesn't reduce the community's reproductive capacity. Accusing you of witchcraft is cost-free. If you are convicted and executed, your cottage and income revert to your children or the community. Your death benefits others. This makes you expendable. You live in constant vulnerability, economically precarious, socially marginalized, at risk of accusation and violence. Your widowhood and age combine to make you nearly worthless in society's eyes, except as a scapegoat or as property waiting to be inherited. You cling to your independence because it is all you have, knowing that your vulnerability increases with every year you survive. According to research by historian Dr. Laura Gowing on elderly women in early modern England, old widows were particularly vulnerable to poverty, accusation, and violence. Their age made them economically marginal. They couldn't do heavy labour. They were seen as past usefulness. Their widowhood meant they had no husband to protect or provide for them. Communities viewed elderly widows as burdens and potential witches. Witchcraft accusations targeted elderly widows disproportionately because these women were socially expendable. Their deaths cost the community nothing and might even benefit others through inheritance. Elderly widowhood combined vulnerability of gender, age, and legal status to create extreme precarity. Let's examine widows in colonial America, where frontier conditions created different challenges and opportunities. You are a 30-year-old widow in Massachusetts Bay Colony, 1660. Your husband died of fever, leaving you with 3 children and a farm. The farm is modest, enough to support a family if well managed, but requiring constant labour. As a widow, you have legal rights to the property, your dower, plus whatever your husband left you by will. You can own land, make contracts appear in court, but you face enormous practical challenges. Running a farm requires heavy labour, ploughing, planting, harvesting, maintaining buildings and equipment, caring for animals. You have 3 children to feed, clothe, and raise. You are overwhelmed. The community expects you to remarry quickly. The colony needs stable family units. Everyone must be part of a household headed by a man. A widow heading a household is anomalous suspect, potentially disruptive. Church elders, neighbours, town officials all pressure you to remarry, but remarriage has stakes beyond your personal preference. Your farm is valuable. Several men court you, all with obvious interest in your property. If you remarry, your new husband gains legal control of everything. He becomes head of household, controlling your children, including disciplining them, putting them to work, arranging their futures, controlling the farm, controlling you. Choose wrong, and you could end up with an abusive husband who mistreats your children and ruins the farm your late husband built. You try to manage alone. You hire day labourers during planting and harvest. You work from dawn to dark. Your older children work beyond their years. Your 10-year-old son does work meant for adult men. Your 8-year-old daughter manages household tasks beyond her capabilities. You are all exhausted, always behind on necessary work, barely surviving. The community disapproves. Town meetings discuss your situation. Some argue you should be assigned a guardian, a male relative or town-appointed man who'd make decisions for you. Others argue you should be fined for not maintaining the property adequately. There are laws requiring property owners to keep buildings in repair and land productive. Your struggle to survive alone is interpreted as failure, as evidence you need male control. After a year, you remarry, not because you want to, but because survival requires it. You choose carefully a widower with his own farm, who seems kind to his children, who agrees to respect your children's inheritance rights. The marriage is practical more than romantic. You've traded independence for survival, autonomy for security. It is a trade most colonial widows made. Few could manage farms alone. Few could resist community pressure to remarry. Few wanted to struggle in desperate poverty when remarriage offered relief. According to research by historian Dr. Cornelia Hughes Dayton on women in colonial New England, colonial widows had legal rights but faced intense practical and social pressure to remarry. The harsh conditions of colonial life made independence difficult. Farms required labor that most widows couldn't perform alone. Communities needed orderly households and stable family structures. Widows who remained unmarried disrupted this order. Most colonial widows remarried within a year or two, choosing new husbands carefully, but ultimately trading autonomy for economic survival and social acceptability. The colonial widow's dangerous freedom was brief. She had legal rights, but lacked practical ability to maintain independence long-term. Let's examine the case of Mary Dyer, whose widowhood and religious conviction led to her execution. Mary was born in England around 1611, married William Dyer, and emigrated to Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1635. She became involved with Anne Hutchinson's religious movement, challenging Puritan orthodoxy. After Anne's banishment, Mary and William moved to Rhode Island. Mary became a Quaker in the 1650s. Quakers believed in direct divine inspiration, gender equality in religious matters, and refused to defer to authority. These beliefs were heretical to Puritans. Massachusetts Bay Colony banned Quakers, passing laws that Quakers who entered the colony would be imprisoned, whipped, and banished on pain of death. Mary repeatedly returned to Massachusetts to preach Quakerism and protest the anti-Quaker laws. She was arrested, tried, and sentenced to banishment. She returned again. She was arrested again, tried again, and this time sentenced to death. She was hanged on Boston Common on the 1st of June, 1616. Mary's widowhood. She was functionally independent from her husband William, who didn't share her religious activism to this degree, gave her autonomy that enabled her religious work. A woman more tightly controlled by a husband might not have been able to repeatedly travel to Massachusetts to preach. Mary's willingness to defy authority, to insist on her right to preach, despite being female and despite laws forbidding it, exemplified the threat of independent women. She wouldn't submit to male authority. Not her husbands, not the colonial governments, not the Puritan churches. This made her dangerous enough to execute. According to research by historian Dr. Mary Maples, done on Quaker women in colonial America, Quakerism gave women unusual religious authority and independence. Quaker belief in the inner light, direct access to divine truth. Mediant women could be ministers and preachers. This contradicted Puritan gender hierarchy that subordinated women to male authority. Mary Dyer's execution was partly about religious heterodoxy, but also about gender. She was a woman who claimed religious authority, who preached publicly, who refused to submit to male control. Her independence and defiance made her threatening enough to kill. Let's examine property seizures, how widows' property was taken through legal and extra-legal means. You are a 45-year-old widow. Living in England in 1700, your husband left you a comfortable estate. You've been managing it successfully for 3 years. You have income from tenant farmers, investments, property that you plan to leave to your daughter. Your late husband's nephew appears. He claims your husband's will is invalid due to technical errors. He produces witnesses who testify your husband was mentally incompetent when he made the will. He argues that, in the absence of a valid will, he as nearest male relative should inherit according to laws of intestacy. He is challenging your entire inheritance. You hire lawyers to fight this claim. You have the will, it is properly witnessed and executed. Your husband was perfectly competent when he made it. But the nephew has resources too. He has his own lawyers. He has witnesses willing to testify in his favour. The legal battle consumes years. During these years, your property is contested. You can't sell any of it. The sale would be challenged. You can't make major investments. The money might not be yours. You are in legal limbo. Your independence suspended while courts decide whether you legitimately own what your husband left you. The nephew makes your life difficult in other ways. He questions your financial decisions, suggesting you are mismanaging the estate. He spreads rumours that you are spending recklessly, that you are incompetent, that you are being cheated by advisors. He is building a case that even if the will is valid, you shouldn't be allowed to control the property because you are incapable of managing it properly. Finally, after 5 years of litigation, the court rules in your favour. The will is upheld. The estate is yours. You've won, but at enormous cost. You've spent a fortune on lawyers. You've endured 5 years of stress and uncertainty. Your health has suffered. Your daughter's marriage prospects were delayed because potential suitors weren't sure whether you'd have money to provide a dowry. Your victory doesn't protect you from future challenges. The nephew could bring new claims. Other relatives could challenge your control of specific properties. You'll live in constant awareness that your property rights, though legal, are vulnerable to challenge from male relatives who believe they're more entitled to property than you are. This scenario played out constantly. Widows' inheritances were challenged by male relatives who believed women shouldn't control property. Even when widows won legal battles, the process was expensive, exhausting, and damaging. The threat of legal challenge was a tool to pressure widows to surrender property voluntarily or to remarry men who could defend their claims. According to research by historian Dr. Eileen Spring on law, land and family in aristocratic families, widows' property rights were constantly challenged through legal mechanisms. Wills were contested, women's competence questioned, creative legal arguments made to transfer property from widows to male relatives. Even when widows had clear legal rights, enforcing those rights required resources and determination. Many widows surrendered property rather than fight expensive legal battles. Those who fought often won, but at enormous cost. The legal vulnerability of widows' property demonstrated that legal rights meant little without ability to defend them against men who believed women shouldn't control wealth. Let's examine widows' sexuality and how society policed it. You are a 28-year-old widow, beautiful, living alone. Your husband died 6 months ago. You are observing mourning. You wear black. You don't attend social events. You are appropriately somber, but people watch you constantly, looking for any sign of sexual impropriety. You have male visitors, your late husband's business partner settling estate matters, your brother checking on you, tradesmen delivering goods. Every male visitor is noted and gossiped about. Neighbours speculate. Is that man your lover? Are you having affairs already before your husband is cold in his grave? Your perfectly innocent interactions with men are interpreted sexually. The scrutiny is suffocating. You can't smile at a man without people assuming sexual interest. You can't have a male friend without being accused of adultery. Legally impossible for widows, but the term is still used. You can't express any sexuality without being labelled a whore. Widows are supposed to be sexually dead, mourning your husband eternally. never looking at another man, but simultaneously you are assumed to be sexually voracious. Medical texts claim that women who've experienced sexual intercourse in marriage develop insatiable appetites. Widows, having known sexual pleasure, supposedly crave it constantly. You are simultaneously expected to be asexual and assumed to be hypersexual, an impossible contradiction. If you take a lover, you are condemned. Widows who have extramarital sexual relationships are punished far more severely than men in similar situations. You could be charged with fornication, fined, publicly shamed. Your reputation would be destroyed. Your property could be challenged. Immoral women are unfit to control property. Your children could be taken from you. Immoral mothers are unfit parents. But if you never show sexual interest in anyone, you are also suspicious. Why don't you want to remarry? Are you sexually deviant? Did you murder your husband? Are you a witch who has sex with demons? Your celibacy is as suspicious as sexuality would be. There is no acceptable way to manage your sexuality as a widow. Everything is wrong. The sexual policing of widows served to control them. Making widows' sexuality always suspect, always wrong, created constant vulnerability. Any widow could be accused of sexual impropriety. This threat could be used to pressure widows to remarry, proving their sexuality was properly controlled by a new husband, to behave submissively, avoiding attention that might lead to accusations, or to surrender property. Immoral women don't deserve wealth. Widows' dangerous freedom included sexual freedom that patriarchal society couldn't tolerate. According to research by historian Dr. Amanda Flather on gender and space in early modern England, widows' sexuality was subject to intense scrutiny and control. Widows were simultaneously assumed to be sexually experienced, and therefore dangerous, and expected to be sexually inactive out of respect for dead husbands. The contradiction created situations where widows couldn't win. Any sexual behavior was wrong, but complete asexuality was also suspicious. This sexual policing was a mechanism of control, keeping widows aware that their reputations, and therefore their social and economic positions, were always vulnerable to attack based on supposed sexual misconduct. Let's examine the case of Jane Wenham, the last woman convicted of witchcraft in England, who was an elderly widow. Jane was born around 1642 in Hertfordshire. By 1712, she was about 70 years old, widowed, living alone in poverty. She was known in her community as a cunning woman who practiced folk healing and magic. In 1712, Jane had a dispute with a local farmer. Soon after, strange events occurred. His servants claimed to be bewitched, suffering fits and visions. Jane was blamed. Accusations escalated. Multiple people testified that Jane had cursed them, appeared to them as a spectre, caused livestock to die. The accusations followed familiar patterns. An elderly widow, Paul, with a reputation for magical knowledge, blamed for community misfortunes. Jane was tried at the Hertfordshire Assizes in 1712. The evidence against her was typical of witchcraft trials. Spectral evidence, people claimed her spirit appeared to them, maleficium, harm caused by witchcraft, and her own purported confessions under pressure. She was convicted and sentenced to death, but times were changing. By 1712, educated elites were increasingly skeptical of witchcraft. Jane's case attracted attention from London intellectuals who saw it as embarrassing superstition. Pressure mounted on the authorities. Jane's sentence was commuted and she was eventually pardoned. She lived out her remaining years, supported by charitable donors, dying in 1730. Jane Wenham's case demonstrates the vulnerability of elderly widows to witchcraft accusations even into the 18th century, but also shows how attitudes were shifting. Earlier, Jane would have been executed without question. By 1712, her conviction was controversial enough that elite intervention saved her, but she'd still been arrested, tried, convicted, and lived for months under sentence of death. Her widowhood, her age, and her poverty had made her vulnerable to accusation in ways that would have been impossible for a younger woman with a husband's protection, or for a wealthy woman with resources to defend herself. According to research by historian Dr. James Sharp on the Jane Wenham case, her trial represented the end of an era. She was convicted but not executed because by the early 18th century, witchcraft belief was declining among elites even as it persisted in rural communities. Jane's elderly widowhood made her a classic target for witchcraft accusation. Had she been tried 50 years earlier, she'd certainly have been hanged. Her survival was partly luck of timing. She was accused just as belief in witchcraft was fading among the powerful, but thousands of elderly widows before her had been less fortunate. Let's examine widows' relationships with their adult children and how those dynamics affected widows' independence. You are a 55-year-old widow. You have 3 adult children, 2 sons and a daughter, all married with children of their own. You have property that will eventually go to them. Your relationship with your children shapes your widowhood. Your eldest son believes he should control your property. You are old by early modern standards. You are female. You need male guidance. He suggests you move in with him and his family. You'd give up your house, and he'd manage your money, providing you room, board, and a small allowance. This would give him control over your property while you are alive and ensure it stays in his control when you die. You refuse. You want to maintain your own household, your independence. Your son is angry. He accuses you of stubbornness, of risking your welfare by living alone. He hints that you are not mentally competent to manage your affairs. He might bring a legal challenge to have himself appointed your guardian, taking control of your property by declaring you incompetent. Your younger son is more respectful of your independence but constantly needs money. He is struggling financially and he knows you have property. He asks you for loans that he never repays. He pressures you to help him buy land, establish his business, pay his debts. He is not openly trying to take your property, but he is slowly draining your resources, leaving you with less to live on and less to leave to your other children. Your daughter is married. She has no legal claim to your property. Under common law, inheritance goes to sons, and daughters receive dowries at marriage. You love your daughter and want to provide for her. You consider leaving her something in your will, maybe the house, maybe money, maybe household goods. But this would upset your sons, who believe they're entitled to everything. Your attempts to provide for your daughter create family conflict. Your children's interest in your property affects every relationship. They're not simply your children who love you, they're your heirs who benefit from your death. This creates horrible dynamics. Are they visiting you because they care about you or because they want to stay in your good graces so you don't disinherit them? When they suggest you are not well enough to live alone, are they concerned for you or trying to seize control of your property? Do they want you to live a long, happy life, or are they impatient for their inheritance? Some widows use their property as leverage to ensure respectful treatment. If children mistreated you, you could threaten to change your will, leaving everything to charity or to whichever child treated you best. This gave you power, but it also created resentment. Your children might behave well out of mercenary interest rather than love. The property that should have been your security became a source of family conflict and mistrust. According to research by historian Dr. Lynn Bottlehoe on elderly women in early modern England, widows' relationships with adult children were often shaped by property interests. Children who stood to inherit had financial interest in their mother's death or in controlling her while alive. This created dynamics where love and duty mixed with resentment and greed. Widows who maintained control of their property could use it as leverage to ensure respectful treatment. But this strategy had costs. Some widows surrendered property to children early, hoping for gratitude and good treatment, but often ended up mistreated once children had secured the inheritance. Other widows held on to property until death, maintaining independence but living in family conflict. There were no good options. property and family love became hopelessly entangled. Let's examine institutional controls on widows, how governments and churches tried to regulate widow behavior. You are a widow in a German city in the 16th century. You are subject to a complex web of regulations designed to control you. The city council has regulations about widows. You must observe mourning for a specified period, at least 1 year. During mourning, you must wear black. You can't attend festivals or dances. You can't remarry. You are expected to be visibly constantly grieving. The city regulates when you can remarry. You must wait at least 1 year, sometimes longer, especially if you are pregnant or might be pregnant. This ensures certainty about paternity. Any child born must clearly be your late husband's, not a new husband's. Your sexuality and reproductive capacity are state interests regulated by law. If you operate a business, the city guild regulates your activities. As a widow, you might be allowed to finish your late husband's contracts, but you can't take on new apprentices, can't expand the business, might be required to hire a male master craftsman to supervise the work. The guild wants to ensure widows don't compete too successfully with male guild members. Your economic activity is restricted to prevent you from threatening male economic dominance. The church also regulates your behavior. You are expected to be at church every Sunday, to take communion, to confess regularly. If you miss services, you are investigated. Are you ill, or are you becoming spiritually wayward? Widows are seen as spiritually vulnerable. Without a husband's godly guidance, you might fall into sin or heresy. The church watches you for signs of moral decline. If you are poor, the city poor relief system regulates you. You receive a small allowance, but you must prove you are deserving. You must behave morally. No drinking, no sexual relationships, no behavior that suggests you are the cause of your own poverty. You must accept any work offered, any marriage proposed. If you refuse work or remarriage, your relief can be cut off. You are poor and therefore not entitled to make choices about your own life. The cumulative effect of these regulations is that you have legal rights as a widow. You can own property, make contracts, conduct business, but your exercise of those rights is heavily constrained. Every aspect of your life is regulated by institutions seeking to control you, to ensure that your widowhood doesn't threaten social, economic, or religious order. Your dangerous freedom is hemmed in by rules designed to make you less dangerous. According to research by historian Dr. Mary Wiesner, Hanks on widows in early modern German cities. Urban widows were subject to extensive regulation by city councils, guilds, and churches. These institutions saw widows as problematic women with legal rights but without male supervision. Regulations were designed to limit widows' independence, to channel their behavior in acceptable directions, to prevent them from becoming too economically successful or morally wayward. The extent of regulation reveals how threatening widow independence was to patriarchal institutions. Widows' legal rights had to be counterbalanced by social and institutional controls that limited how those rights could be exercised. Let's examine the case of Hester Downing, a wealthy widow in 17th century London whose business success made her both admired and resented. Hester was born around 1630, married Robert Downing, a successful merchant. When Robert died in 1661, Hester inherited his business, importing luxury goods from the Mediterranean and the East. Hester expanded the business. She had excellent business sense, established new trade connections, and built relationships with suppliers and customers. She became one of the wealthiest merchants in London. She owned ships, warehouses, a grand house. She was living proof that women could succeed in international trade. But her success generated hostility. Male merchants resented her competition. They complained that she undercut their prices, that she had unfair advantages, though they couldn't specify what those advantages were, that her success was somehow illegitimate. Some whispered that she must be sleeping with influential men who gave her preferential treatment. They couldn't accept that a woman could succeed through business acumen alone. Hester faced constant legal challenges. Business rivals sued her, claiming she'd violated contracts or sold inferior goods. Most cases were dismissed as groundless, but defending herself was expensive and time-consuming. The lawsuits were designed to harass her, to make doing business so difficult that she'd give up. Hester never remarried. She valued her independence too much. She knew that remarriage would mean handing her business to a husband who might be less competent than she was. She lived as an independent businesswoman, one of the few women in England conducting international trade in her own right. When Hester died in 1709, she was in her late 70s, having spent nearly 50 years as a successful merchant widow. She left a fortune to various relatives and charities. Her obituaries acknowledged her business success, but also emphasized how unusual and exceptional she was, implying that other women shouldn't expect to replicate her success, that she was an anomaly rather than an example of women's potential. According to research by historian Dr. Margot Finn on widows in business, Hester Downing represented the possibilities and limitations of widow enterprise. Widowhood gave her legal standing to conduct business that married women could never have. She used that standing to build extraordinary success, but her success was treated as exceptional and threatening. Male competitors tried to undermine her. Her achievements were attributed to luck or to sexual favors rather than skill. When women succeeded in business, patriarchal society reframed that success to minimize its significance and to prevent it from challenging assumptions about women's incapacity for commerce. Let's examine the experience of widows who lost children, how grief and widowhood compounded vulnerability. You are 30 years old. Your husband died 2 years ago. You have one child, a 5-year-old daughter. She is your entire world, your reason for living, your motivation to continue managing your late husband's property, your hope for the future. Then she dies. Fever takes her in 3 days. You are now childless, as well as husbandless. Your grief is overwhelming. You've lost your husband, now your child. You are alone in the world. You have property but no family, no heir, no one to leave anything to. The property that gave you purpose. You were managing it for your daughter's future. Now seems meaningless. Why maintain a house, a farm, a business when there is no one to inherit it? Your late husband's family circles with your daughter dead. You have no children. If you die, your property reverts to your late husband's family, his brothers, his nephews. They're suddenly very interested in your welfare. They encourage you to come live with them. They offer to help you manage your property. They're positioning themselves to inherit, and they'd prefer you surrender control now rather than wait for your death. You have no living children to care for you in old age. This makes you economically vulnerable. What will happen when you are too old to manage property? Who will take care of you? Your late husband's family offers, come live with us. We'll provide for you in your old age. But you know the subtext. Give us control of your property now, and we'll reluctantly support you until you die. You consider remarrying, not for love. You are drowning in grief, but for security and companionship. A new husband could protect your property, could give you children who'd be yours, even if they wouldn't be your late husband's. But remarriage feels like betrayal. You've lost your husband and child. Taking a new husband, having new children, feels like replacing them. You are paralyzed by grief and indecision. Your childlessness makes you more vulnerable to accusations and attacks. You have no children to speak for you, to defend your reputation, to testify to your good character. You are completely alone. If neighbors accuse you of witchcraft, if relatives challenge your property rights, if anyone attacks your reputation, you have no family to protect you. Your isolation makes you an easy target. Some childless widows in your position give up. They surrender their property to their late husband's family, enter convents, or live with relatives as dependents. Others cling stubbornly to independence. Despite isolation and grief, you are trying to survive, managing your property, because it is all you have. all you can control in a world that has taken everyone you loved. According to research by historian Dr. Naomi Tadmer on family and kinship in early modern England, childless widows were particularly vulnerable. Without children, they had no clear heirs, no family to protect them, no one to care for them in old age. Late husbands' families often pressed claims on childless widows' property, arguing that without children, the property should revert to the husband's bloodline. Childless widows faced difficult choices: remarry and possibly have children with a new husband, surrender property, and accept dependence on relatives, or maintain independence in isolation and grief. None of these options offered security or happiness. Childless widowhood combined grief with extreme vulnerability. Let's examine witch trials in Scotland where widows faced particularly intense persecution. You are a 65-year-old widow in a small Scottish village in 1590. Scotland's witch hunts are more intense than England's. Thousands of accused witches are being tortured and executed. You are terrified. You fit the profile of women being accused. You are old, widowed, live alone, have a reputation as a healer. You know herbal remedies. You've been treating neighbours' illnesses for decades. You have a cat. You've had disputes with neighbours. All of this makes you vulnerable to accusation. One day you are arrested. A neighbour's child died of fever. The neighbour claims you cursed the child. She remembers you looked at the child strangely weeks before the death. The evidence is absurd, but you are taken to the Tolbooth jail for examination. The examination is torture. You are stripped and searched for the devil's mark. Any mole, scar, or birthmark is interpreted as evidence the devil marked you as his servant. You are sleep deprived, kept awake for days until you are delirious. You are tortured with thumbscrews, leg irons, the boots, devices that crush your legs. The pain is excruciating. You are told you'll be released if you confess. You confess. You'll say anything to stop the torture. You confess to meeting the devil, to making a pact with him, to cursing neighbours, to flying through the air to witches' sabbaths. None of it is true, but the torture has broken you. You sign a confession with a shaking hand. Your confession is used to convict you. You are strangled and then burned. The standard execution for Scottish witches. Your body is destroyed by fire, your property is forfeit to the crown and to your accusers. Your name is recorded in church records as a confessed witch, a permanent stain on your memory. You are one of thousands. Scotland's witch hunts killed approximately 4,000 people between 1560 and 1700, about 85% of them women, many of them widows. The intensity of Scottish persecution far exceeded England's. Torture was legal in Scotland, it wasn't in England, making false confessions easier to extract. The Presbyterian Kirk was zealously committed to rooting out witchcraft. The combination created one of history's worst witch hunts. According to research by historian Dr. Julian Goodare on Scottish witch hunts, widows were disproportionately accused and executed. The same factors that made English widows vulnerable independent living, no male protection, folk healing knowledge, social marginality, made Scottish widows targets. But Scotland's legal use of torture and intense religious persecution made the consequences far more deadly. Scottish widows lived in terror during witch hunt periods. Any accusation could lead to torture, forced confession, and execution. Widowhood in Scotland during witch hunts was desperately dangerous. Let's examine the case of Janet Horne, the last person executed for witchcraft in Britain, who was an elderly widow. Janet, her real name was probably Janet Boyd, was born around 1670 in Sutherland, Scotland. By 1727 years old, widowed, living in poverty. She was illiterate and probably suffered from senile dementia. Janet was accused of witchcraft in 1727. The charges claimed she'd turned her daughter into a pony and had her shod by the devil. The evidence was that Janet's daughter had deformed hands and feet, birth defects that were interpreted as hoof marks left from being transformed into a pony. The accusations were obviously absurd, but they were taken seriously. Janet was arrested and tried. By this time, witchcraft prosecution was declining. Educated people no longer believed in witchcraft, but in remote Sutherland, traditional beliefs persisted. Janet was convicted. She was sentenced to be burned alive. On the day of execution, Janet apparently didn't understand what was happening. She warmed her hands at the fire that was being built to burn her, saying how nice it was to have a warm fire. She was either too senile or too traumatized to comprehend that she was about to be executed. She was burned alive in a tar barrel at Dornoch in 1727. Janet Horne's execution was controversial even at the time. By 1727, educated opinion had turned against witch prosecution. Janet's case was seen as an embarrassing example of backward superstition. The outcry after her execution contributed to ending witch prosecution in Britain. But this was no comfort to Janet, who died in confused terror, an elderly widow murdered by her community for imaginary crimes. According to research by historian Dr. Emma Wilby on Scottish witchcraft, Janet Horne's case represented the last gasp of witch prosecution in Britain. She was the last victim of a persecution that had killed thousands of women over 2 centuries. Her elderly widowhood, her poverty, her mental deterioration made her vulnerable to accusations that earlier would have been commonplace, but by 1727 were unusual. She was unlucky enough to live in a remote area where traditional beliefs persisted just long enough to kill her. Her death as a widow accused of witchcraft bookends a history of widow persecution that spans medieval to early modern periods. Let's examine wealthy widows as patrons, one positive aspect of widowhood where women used their independence to support arts, religion and charity. You are a wealthy 50-year-old widow in Florence, Italy in 1450. Your late husband was a banker. You've inherited substantial wealth. Unlike married women, you control this wealth yourself. You decide to become a patron. You commission art. You hire Renaissance painters to create altarpieces for churches. You commission illuminated manuscripts. You support young artists, giving them commissions that launch their careers. Your patronage makes you culturally important. Artists dedicate works to you, grateful for your support. You support religious institutions. You donate money to convents, to churches, to monasteries. You endow chapels. You pay for church repairs. You commission religious art. Your religious patronage brings you spiritual credit. You are securing prayers for your soul and your late husband's soul. It also brings you social prestige. You support charitable institutions. You endow hospitals for the poor. You support orphanages. You provide dowries for poor girls who couldn't otherwise marry. Your charity makes you beloved in your community. People pray for you, grateful for your generosity. Your patronage gives you power and prestige that would have been impossible while married. If your husband were alive, he'd control the wealth and make patronage decisions. As a widow, you make these decisions yourself. You are shaping culture, supporting religion, helping the poor all through your own choices. Your widowhood has given you agency to affect your world in ways few women could. But your patronage also brings criticism. Some say you are spending money that should go to your husband's family. Others say you are trying to buy salvation. Your charity is mercenary rather than genuinely spiritual. Male relatives resent that you are disposing of wealth they believe should be theirs. Even your generosity is criticized, because it demonstrates your independence and power. Still, you continue. You value the ability to make a difference, to shape your world, to leave a legacy beyond children. Your widowhood, despite its challenges and dangers, has given you opportunities to exercise power that married women never have. You are using those opportunities while you can. According to research by historian Dr. Sharon Strocchia on widows as patrons in Renaissance Italy, wealthy widows were major cultural forces. Their patronage supported artists, religious institutions, and charitable works. Widowhood gave them control over wealth that they used to exercise cultural and social power. They commissioned art, endowed churches, supported charitable institutions, shaping Renaissance culture in ways that are often underappreciated, because they were women and therefore written out of histories focused on male patrons. Widow patronage was one way that women's dangerous freedom could be channeled into socially acceptable and culturally productive activities. Let's examine a final reflection on what the history of widows reveals about patriarchal society's fear of women's independence. Widows were simultaneously the most legally empowered and the most socially vulnerable women in pre-modern societies. They had legal rights. They could own property, make contracts, conduct business, appear in court in their own names. These rights made them unique among women, but these rights also made them threatening. Widows proved that women could manage property, conduct business, make decisions without male control. Every successful widow undermined patriarchal claims that women were naturally incapable of autonomy. Every widow who managed an estate, ran a business, or raised children successfully without a husband demonstrated that male guardianship wasn't necessary. This is why widows were so feared, not because they were actually dangerous, but because their existence challenged patriarchal ideology. If women could be autonomous while widowed, why couldn't they be autonomous while married or unmarried? If widows could own property successfully, why did married women need coverture? If widows could make decisions, why did women need male guardians? Widows' legal rights and practical capabilities revealed that women's subordination was political rather than natural. Society responded to this threat with pressure to remarry, witchcraft accusations, property seizures, violence, and constant social surveillance. Widows who resisted remarriage were punished through isolation, accusation, and persecution. Widows who succeeded in business faced resentment and sabotage. Widows who exercised their legal rights faced legal challenges from male relatives who believed women shouldn't control property. The women who maintained their independence, widows like Bess of Hardwick, Anne Clifford, Hester Downing, and thousands of others whose names are lost to history, demonstrated extraordinary courage and determination. They faced enormous pressure to surrender their autonomy. They faced social disapproval, economic challenges, legal battles, sometimes accusations of witchcraft or husband murder. Yet they persisted. They valued their independence enough to fight for it despite all costs. Their resistance mattered. Every widow who refused to remarry, who successfully managed property, who fought legal battles for her rights, who resisted attempts to control her, all of these women demonstrated that female autonomy was possible. They lived proof that patriarchal claims about women's incapacity were lies. Their dangerous freedom challenged the foundations of gender hierarchy. We owe these widows remembrance. They fought for autonomy in societies that denied women independence. They proved that women could govern themselves despite centuries of ideology claiming otherwise. They paid enormous costs for their independence. Social isolation, constant struggle, sometimes execution as witches, but they never accepted that being female meant accepting permanent subordination. Let's examine the specific case of Alice Thornton, a 17th century English widow whose diary reveals the daily challenges of widowhood. Alice was born in 1626, married William Thornton in 1651. They had 9 children, though only 4 survived to adulthood. William died in 1668, leaving Alice a 42-year-old widow with children to raise and an estate to manage. Alice's diary, which she kept for decades, records the constant struggle of widowhood. She faced financial challenges. William left debts that she had to pay. She faced legal challenges. William's relatives contested parts of her inheritance. She faced practical challenges, managing an estate, raising children, maintaining social position, all without a husband's support. Alice wrote about the loneliness of widowhood. She missed William's companionship. She felt isolated. Widows occupied an awkward social position. not quite fitting into social gatherings designed for married couples. She wrote about the constant financial anxiety. Would she have enough income to support her children, to maintain the estate, to provide dowries for her daughters? Alice also wrote about pressure to remarry. Various men courted her, some sincerely, some obviously interested in her property. Male relatives suggested remarriage would solve her problems, but Alice didn't want to remarry. She valued her independence, her ability to make decisions for her children without a stepfather interfering. She chose to remain unmarried, despite the difficulties. Alice's diary records years of legal battles over property. William's relatives brought multiple lawsuits challenging her inheritance. Alice spent enormous amounts on lawyers, dealing with legal proceedings that dragged on for years. She described the stress, the frustration, the sense that men were trying to take from her what was legally hers simply because she was a woman. Alice lived as a widow for over 40 years, dying in 1707 at age 81. Her diary is one of the most detailed records of widow experience we have. It shows widowhood's challenges, financial struggle, legal battles, loneliness, social marginality, but also widowhood's compensations, independence, authority over her children, ability to make her own decisions. Alice valued her widowhood enough to resist remarriage, despite decades of pressure. According to research by historian Dr. Francis Harris on Alice Thornton's life and writings, Alice's diary provides invaluable insight into 17th century widowhood. She recorded both the practical challenges and the emotional experience of living as an independent woman in a society structured around male authority. Her determination to maintain her widowhood despite economic struggles and social pressure demonstrates how important autonomy was to some women. Alice's written record gives voice to an experience shared by thousands of widows whose stories weren't preserved. Let's examine Jewish widows in early modern Europe, whose experiences were shaped by both gender and religious minority status. You are a 35-year-old Jewish widow living in a German city's Jewish quarter in 1600. Your widowhood is shaped by Jewish religious law and custom, as well as by Christian civil law. Under Jewish law, you have inheritance rights and some protections. Your ketubah marriage contract specifies what you are entitled to if your husband dies, the ketubah amount plus return of your dowry. Jewish law recognizes your right to this property. Jewish communities have mechanisms to ensure widows aren't left destitute, but you are also subject to Christian civil law because you live in a Christian state. Christian law determines property rights in ways that sometimes conflict with Jewish law. You navigate between two legal systems, trying to secure your rights under both. Christian authorities sometimes refuse to recognize Jewish marriage contracts, making your property rights precarious. You are part of a small Jewish community, tightly knit out of necessity and mutual protection. The community supports widows, charity funds, communal assistance, social networks. This support is vital because you face discrimination from the Christian majority. Employment options are limited. You face anti-Semitic violence and discrimination. You need community support to survive. But community support comes with control. Community leaders have strong opinions about how you should behave. If you are seen as bringing shame to the community, if you are accused of sexual misconduct, if you engage in business with Christians in ways that are disapproved, if you violate community norms, you can be punished through social exclusion or denial of community charity. Your independence is limited by community pressure to conform. You consider remarriage within the community. There are Jewish widowers, men who need wives, but the Jewish community is small. Your options are limited. You might marry someone much older, someone you don't particularly like, simply because options are few, or you remain unmarried, accepting the economic struggle and social marginality of widowhood. Your position as a Jewish widow in a Christian society creates double marginalization. You are a woman in a patriarchal society. You are Jewish in a Christian state. You are widowed and therefore independent, which is threatening to both Christian and Jewish patriarchal structures. You survive through resilience, community ties, and constant negotiation of the complex legal and social systems that constrain you. According to research by historian Dr. Deborah Kaplan on Jewish women in early modern Germany, Jewish widows navigated complex legal and social terrain. They had rights under Jewish law but lived under Christian civil law, creating jurisdictional complications. Jewish communities provided support networks vital for widow survival, but also exercised social control. Jewish widows faced discrimination from Christian society and gendered limitations within Jewish communities. Their experiences show how religious minority status complicated already difficult widow experiences, creating multiple layers of vulnerability and constraint. Let's examine the case of Marjorie Kempe, a medieval widow who claimed religious visions and travelled as a pilgrim. Marjorie was born in King's Lynn, England, around 1373. She married John Kempe and had 14 children. Around 1413, she and John negotiated what was essentially a separation. They'd live chastely, and Marjorie would be free to pursue her religious calling. When John died around 1431, Marjorie was truly free. She was about 58 years old, a widow with adult children. She spent her widowhood travelling on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, to Rome, to Compostela, to various English shrines. She claimed to experience divine visions. She wept loudly during religious services, convinced she was experiencing mystical union with God. She preached publicly, though women weren't supposed to preach. Marjorie's behaviour was controversial. Religious authorities interrogated her multiple times, suspicious that her visions were heretical or demonic rather than divine. Her public weeping and emotional religious displays were seen as inappropriate or manipulative. Her insistence on preaching and teaching about religion violated gender norms. Women weren't supposed to be religious authorities. But Marjorie was a widow. This gave her freedom to behave in ways married women couldn't. She had no husband to control her movements or forbid her pilgrimages. She controlled her own resources and could spend them on travel. Her widowhood enabled her religious activities in ways that wouldn't have been possible if she'd still been married. Marjorie dictated her autobiography. She was illiterate around 1438, one of the first autobiographies in English. The book describes her life, her visions, her travels, and her defense against accusations that her religious experiences were false or heretical. Her book is invaluable evidence of how one medieval widow used her independence to pursue a religious calling that would have been impossible without widowhood's freedom. According to research by historian Dr. Nanda Hopenwasser on Marjorie Kempe's life, Marjorie exemplifies how widowhood could enable religious women. Medieval Christianity valued female piety, but it also constrained women's religious expression. Widowhood offered women autonomy to pursue intensive religious lives, as pilgrims, as mystics, as members of religious communities. Marjorie used her widowhood to travel, to claim religious authority through her visions, to teach and preach despite prohibition. Her independence as a widow made her controversial, but also made her religious career possible. She transformed widow freedom from dangerous into holy, though society remained suspicious of her throughout her life. Let's examine widows accused of adultery or fornication, how widows' sexuality was criminalized. You are a 33-year-old widow. You've been widowed for a year. You are lonely, sexually frustrated. You are used to sexual activity from years of marriage, and you begin a relationship with a man, another widow, a single man, someone you are genuinely attracted to. You are discreet, but not secret. Friends know you are involved with him. Within weeks, you are charged with fornication sexual activity outside marriage. The charge is brought by church courts, which prosecute moral offences. You are summoned to appear. You are interrogated about your sexual relationship. The questions are invasive, humiliating. You are asked about specific sexual acts, frequency, whether you've used contraception, whether you've conceived. If you admit the relationship, lying under oath is a separate sin. You are convicted of fornication. The punishment might be public penance, standing in church wearing a white sheet, confessing your sin publicly, enduring community shaming. You might be fined. If you are a repeat offender, or if authorities consider your sexual activity particularly scandalous, you might be whipped or put in the stocks. Your male partner is also charged, but men typically receive lighter punishment. He might pay a small fine and be released. You, as a woman, receive harsher punishment because female sexual transgression is seen as more serious than male sexual transgression. Your widowhood doesn't give you sexual freedom. It gives you vulnerability to prosecution for exercising sexuality that would be acceptable in marriage. The prosecution has lasting effects. You are marked as a sexual transgressor. Your reputation is destroyed. You are less likely to be able to remarry a respectable man who wants a wife who has been publicly punished for fornication. Your property might be challenged. Immoral women aren't fit to control property. Your children might be taken from you. Immoral mothers aren't fit parents. You are trapped. As a widow, you are assumed to have sexual experience and therefore sexual desire. But acting on that desire, even in a consensual adult relationship, makes you a criminal. You are expected to be celibate for the rest of your life, perhaps decades if you are young, or to remarry. But remarrying means surrendering your independence. There is no path that gives you both sexual fulfillment and autonomy. Some widows conducted secret sexual relationships, risking prosecution to have intimacy. Some remarried despite not wanting to, choosing security and sexual legitimacy over independence. Some remained celibate, accepting loneliness to maintain autonomy. All of these choices involved sacrifice of sexuality, of independence, or of security. Widow sexuality was policed to ensure widows couldn't have both autonomy and sexual fulfillment. According to research by historian Dr. Martin Ingram on church courts and sexual regulation, widows were frequently prosecuted for fornication. Church courts saw widow sexuality as particularly scandalous because widows should be mourning dead husbands, not seeking new sexual partners. Widows prosecuted for sexual relationships faced harsh punishment, designed to shame them and deter other widows from sexual activity. The prosecution of widow sexuality was a mechanism of control. It punished widows for exercising autonomy. It reinforced the message that women's sexuality was only legitimate within marriage under male control, and it pressured widows to remarry by making unmarried sexuality criminal. Let's examine the case of Artemisia Gentilieschi, an Italian Baroque painter whose widowhood enabled her artistic career. Artemisia was born in 1593, daughter of a painter. She was trained by her father and showed extraordinary talent. At 18, she was raped by another painter, Agostino Tassi. The trial was public and traumatic. Artemisia was tortured during testimony to verify she was telling the truth. Artemisia married shortly after the trial, partly to restore her damaged reputation. She continued painting while married, unusual for a woman. Her husband, Pier Antonio Stiazzi, was supportive but financially irresponsible. He accumulated debts while Artemisia supported the family through her painting commissions. The marriage essentially ended by the 1620s. Pier Antonio remained in Florence while Artemisia moved to Rome, then Naples. Though not legally widowed, Artemisia lived independently, like a widow. When Pier Antonio died, date uncertain, probably 1630s, Artemisia was freed from any remaining marital obligations. As a widow, or widow-like independent woman, Artemisia flourished. She received major commissions from aristocratic and royal patrons. She painted powerful images of women, especially Judith beheading Holofernes, a subject she returned to multiple times. Her paintings show women as strong, violent, and vengeful rather than passive and decorative. Many scholars interpret her work as processing her trauma and asserting female power. Artemisia was financially successful, professionally respected, and artistically accomplished. Her widowhood enabled this success. Had she remained in a traditional marriage, her career would have been secondary to her husband's needs. Her independence allowed her to pursue commissions across Italy, to make artistic choices without male interference, to live as a professional artist, rather than as a wife who painted as a hobby. Artemisia died around 1656, having spent 2 decades as an independent widow artist. She left a body of work that is now recognized as among the finest Baroque painting. Her success shows what widows could achieve when they had autonomy and talent. But it also shows how rare such success was. Artemisia had extraordinary talent, family training, and determination. Most widows didn't have these advantages. According to research by art historian Dr. Mary Garrard on Artemisia Gentileschi's life and work, Artemisia used her independence to build an artistic career unprecedented for a woman. Her widowhood freed her from marital constraints that limited most women artists. She could travel to seek commissions, could negotiate contracts in her own name, could make artistic decisions independently. Her success demonstrated women's artistic capabilities, but was treated as exceptional rather than evidence of women's general potential. Artemisia's story shows both the possibilities widowhood created and the barriers that meant few women could take advantage of those possibilities. Let's examine practical survival strategies of poor widows, how women at the bottom of the social hierarchy survived widowhood. You are a 40-year-old widow in a small English village in 1650. Your husband was a labourer. He left you nothing but debts. You have 3 children under 10. You need to survive. You take in spinning work, processing raw wool into thread. The pay is abysmal, barely enough to buy bread. You spin constantly, while cooking, while watching your children, late into the night by firelight. Your fingers are calloused and sore. You spin until you are exhausted, and still you can't earn enough to properly feed your children. You glean in fields after harvest following the reapers, picking up dropped grain. It is back-breaking work, and you are competing with other poor people for every kernel of grain. You gather firewood from common lands. You keep a vegetable garden. You keep chickens if you can afford them. Every little bit helps you survive. You receive parish poor relief, a small weekly allowance, maybe a bit of bread, occasionally some cloth or fuel. It is not enough to live on, but it is something. You are grateful but also humiliated. Receiving charity marks you as a failure. Parish overseers treat you with contempt. You are a drain on community resources. You rely on informal networks. Other poor women share food, watch each other's children, help when illness strikes. You are part of a community of poor widows and wives, all struggling, all helping each other survive. These networks are crucial. Without them, you'd starve. You consider remarriage, but your prospects are poor. You are past your prime. You have children. You have no dowry or property. Men who'd marry. You are similarly desperate, old, disabled, poor, unable to attract younger women with property. Remarriage might not improve your situation and could make it worse if your new husband is abusive or brings more children to feed. You survive through relentless work and constant anxiety. You live one crisis away from complete destitution. If you get sick and can't work, if your children get sick and need care, if the parish cuts your relief, if any of 100 disasters strike, you could end up begging on the roads or dying in a ditch. Your widowhood is precarious survival. not freedom. According to research by historian Dr. Steve Hindle on poverty in early modern England, poor widows were among the most economically vulnerable people in society. They combined gendered wage discrimination, women's work paid far less than men's, sole responsibility for children, and lack of property. Most survived through a mix of low-paid work, poor relief, gleaning and foraging, and informal support networks. Their lives were characterized by relentless work and constant anxiety. For these women, widow independence meant freedom to starve without a husband, not any real autonomy or power. Their survival demonstrates extraordinary resilience in the face of structural poverty and discrimination. Let's examine the specific vulnerability of widows during wars and upheavals. You are a 38-year-old widow in Germany during the 30 Years' War 1618 to 1648. War has devastated your region for years. Armies, soldiers who rape, loot, and kill civilians pass through constantly. You are trying to survive in chaos and violence. As a widow, you are particularly vulnerable. You have no husband to protect you, no male household head that soldiers might respect. When soldiers come through your village, they target women living alone. You hide when you hear soldiers approaching. You hide food, valuables, yourself. Sometimes it works. You've been raped by soldiers multiple times by multiple men. Rape is a weapon of war, and women living alone are easy targets. The trauma is profound, but you have no recourse. There is no authority to complain to, no justice available. You survive the rapes and try to continue living. Your property has been looted repeatedly. Soldiers take food, livestock, household goods, anything valuable. You've been left with nothing multiple times. You rebuild as best you can, only to be looted again when the next army passes through. The constant loss is devastating. You've lost children to war, one son conscripted or killed by soldiers, 2 daughters dead of disease and malnutrition caused by war conditions. You are alone, traumatized, surviving in a landscape of destruction. Your widowhood, which in peacetime would have meant independence and property rights, in wartime means vulnerability and victimization. Some widows fled to cities, seeking safety in numbers. Some attached themselves to armies as camp followers, cooking, washing, nursing, sometimes prostituting themselves for protection and food. Some simply didn't survive, killed by violence, dying of disease or starvation, too traumatized to continue. War destroyed the fragile structures that made widow survival possible in peacetime. According to research by historian Dr. Mary Lindman on the 30 Years' War, women generally and widows particularly suffered enormously during this conflict. The war destroyed property, disrupted economies, and exposed women to violence. Widows without male protection were targeted by soldiers for rape and looting. Many didn't survive the war. Those who did were often left with nothing, property destroyed, children dead, traumatized and impoverished. War demonstrated how widow independence depended on relatively stable social structures. When those structures collapsed in violence, widows' vulnerability became acute and deadly. Let's examine one final case, that of Lady Anne Clifford one more time, focusing specifically on her widowhood strategies. After Anne's second husband died in 1650, she was finally free to focus entirely on her estates. She was 60 years old and had been fighting for her inheritance for 45 years. Now, as a widow, she could finally fully exercise the rights she'd fought so hard to secure. Anne spent her remaining 26 years. She lived to 86, restoring her estates. She rebuilt 6 castles that had fallen into disrepair during the decades of legal battles. She was personally involved in every aspect. She visited construction sites, reviewed plans, made decisions about architecture and decoration. She was hands-on in ways that would have been impossible if she'd had a husband claiming authority over his wife's property. Anne also focused on establishing her legacy. She commissioned paintings, wrote autobiographical texts, created monuments to herself and her ancestors. She was actively constructing how history would remember her as a woman who'd fought for her rights and won, who'd restored her family estates, who'd exercised power independently. She controlled her own narrative in ways women rarely could. Anne used her wealth for patronage. She supported churches, endowed schools, helped poor tenants. Her charity made her beloved in her regions. People remembered her as a benefactor, a powerful woman who used her power generously. She shaped how her memory would be preserved through strategic generosity. Anne never remarried after Philip's death, though she was wealthy and still had years of life ahead. She valued her independence too much. She'd spent decades fighting husbands and male relatives for control of her estates. She wasn't about to surrender that control by remarrying. She lived and died as an independent widow. One of the most powerful women in northern England, Anne Clifford's widowhood demonstrates what widows with resources and determination could achieve. She restored estates, exercised political and economic power, controlled her own legacy. She lived exactly as she wanted, accountable to no one. Her widowhood was her triumph, the culmination of a lifetime of fighting for independence and the reward for her persistence. According to historian Dr. Richard T. Spence, Anne Clifford's final widowhood represented the fulfillment of her life struggle. She'd fought for decades to control property that was rightfully hers. Her widowhood finally gave her complete freedom to exercise that control. She used her remaining years to restore, build, and establish a legacy that would last centuries. Her tomb in Appleby Church identifies her by her ancestral titles, not by her marriages. She is memorialized as Lady Anne Clifford, daughter and heir of her father, not as somebody's wife. This was exactly how she wanted to be remembered, as an independent woman who'd claimed her inheritance and controlled her own life. Let's examine the intersection of widowhood and disability, how disabled widows faced compounded vulnerability. You are a 45-year-old widow who has been blind since childhood. Your husband married you despite your blindness, and you managed household tasks competently through years of practice and adaptation. When he dies, you are left as a blind widow, managing alone. Your disability makes everything more difficult. You can't read documents, can't verify that people handling your business affairs are honest, can't travel independently to pursue legal matters. You are dependent on others to help you manage property, conduct business, navigate legal and economic systems. This dependence creates vulnerability to exploitation. Your husband's nephew, who has been handling some business matters, begins cheating you. He tells you that expenses are higher than they are, pocketing the difference. He claims investments are performing poorly when they're actually profitable. You suspect dishonesty, but can't prove it. You can't see the account books, can't verify his claims. Your blindness makes you vulnerable to theft from someone you must trust. You seek help from other relatives, from neighbours, from your parish, but people are reluctant to help. They don't want to get involved in family disputes. They don't want the responsibility of assisting a blind widow. They question whether you are capable of managing property at all, given your disability. Some suggest you should surrender your property to the nephew who is already managing it. Why fight him when you need his help anyway? Your disability is used as evidence of your incompetence. The nephew brings legal action to have himself appointed your permanent guardian, arguing that a blind woman can't possibly manage property. You fight this. You are blind but not mentally incompetent. You managed fine when your husband was alive by trusting reliable people. But courts are skeptical that a blind woman can exercise property rights independently. Your disability is conflated with incompetence. You struggle to maintain your independence despite disability and despite exploitation. You find a trustworthy lawyer who agrees to help. You replace your dishonest nephew with an honest administrator. You assert your rights despite the barriers your disability creates. But it is exhausting and costly. Your blindness, combined with widowhood, creates compound vulnerability. that able-bodied widows don't face. According to research by historian Dr. David Turner on disability in early modern England, disabled people faced enormous challenges in exercising legal rights. Disabled widows combined gendered vulnerability with disability-related barriers to autonomy. They needed assistance to manage property and navigate legal systems, but were vulnerable to exploitation by those who assisted them. Courts often conflated physical disability with mental incompetence, making it difficult for disabled widows to assert their legal rights. Disabled widowhood was exceptionally precarious. Independence was harder to achieve and maintain when disability created both practical barriers and prejudiced assumptions about capability. Let's examine widows in colonial Latin America, where Spanish and Portuguese legal systems created different widow experiences. You are a widow in Mexico City, 1680. You are a Criolla of Spanish descent, but born in the Americas. Your late husband was a merchant. Under Spanish law, you have significant property rights. Spanish law gives you community property rights. You own half of everything acquired during marriage, not just dower. This means you inherit far more than English widows typically do. You are a wealthy widow with substantial assets, property, business interests, investments. You are one of the wealthiest people in Mexico City. Spanish law also protects your control of property more strongly than English law. You can't be easily pressured to surrender property to male relatives. The legal system recognizes your right to manage your wealth. You hire administrators to help with business, but you make final decisions. You are genuinely powerful in ways that English widows often aren't, but you face other constraints. Spanish colonial society is hierarchical and rigidly controlled by family and community. Your family has strong opinions about how you should behave. You are expected to be pious, charitable, properly modest. Your public behavior is constantly monitored. Any hint of scandal could destroy your reputation and your family's honor. You channel your independence into socially acceptable activities. You become a patron of religious institutions. You donate to convents, commission religious art, support charitable works. This gives you influence and prestige while conforming to expectations of proper widow behavior. You are powerful, but within narrowly defined acceptable parameters. You consider entering a convent. Many wealthy Latin American widows became nuns. In the convent, you'd have security, purpose, and a respected social position. You'd surrender your property to the convent, but gain spiritual status and community. Some convents even allow women to live in private cells with servants, maintaining comfortable lifestyles while being formally religious. It is an attractive option for wealthy widows who want security without remarriage. You decide to remain in the world, using your wealth for family and charitable purposes while maintaining your independence. You arrange marriages for nieces and nephews, support poor relatives, endow religious institutions. You are matriarch of your extended family, wielding influence through your wealth and your strategic use of patronage. Your widowhood has given you a power and position that would have been impossible otherwise. According to research by historian Dr. Asuncion Lavrin on women in colonial Latin America, Spanish colonial law gave widows stronger property rights than English law provided. Community property systems meant widows inherited substantial wealth. Spanish colonial widows used this wealth for religious patronage and family support, gaining influence while conforming to social expectations. Many entered convents, combining wealth with religious life. Latin American widowhood offered different opportunities than European widowhood, though social constraints still limited how widows could exercise their independence. Let's examine the case of Elizabeth Blackwell, a colonial American widow who became a pioneering botanist. Elizabeth was born in England around 1700, married Alexander Blackwell, and emigrated to London. Alexander made bad business decisions and ended up in debtor's prison. To support him and pay his debts, Elizabeth became a botanical illustrator. Elizabeth created a curious herbal, a comprehensive illustrated catalogue of medicinal plants. She drew the plants, engraved the copper plates, and hand-coloured the prints, doing all the work herself. The work was scientifically accurate and artistically beautiful. It was published in volumes from 1737 to 1739 and became a standard reference. Elizabeth's botanical work was done while her husband was in prison. She was functionally a widow, living independently and supporting herself. Her success as a botanical illustrator demonstrated women's capacity for scientific work. She observed plants carefully, rendered them accurately, and compiled information about their medicinal properties. She was doing scientific work disguised as crafts, illustrating rather than researching, but the line was thin. Alexander was eventually released from debtor's prison and moved to Sweden, where he became involved in political intrigue and was executed for treason in 1747. Elizabeth was now truly widowed. She continued her botanical work, though her later life is poorly documented. She died around 1758, having spent decades as an independent woman, supporting herself through scientific illustration. Elizabeth Blackwell's story shows how widowhood or widow-like independence could enable women's intellectual and scientific work. She couldn't have produced a curious herbal while focused on traditional wifely duties. Her need to support herself and her imprisoned husband, and later her actual widowhood, gave her freedom to work intensively on a scientific project. Her botanical work was significant but was framed as illustration and therefore artisanal rather than scientific. This made it acceptable for a woman while still allowing her to do serious botanical observation and documentation. According to research by historian Dr. Lunda Schibinger on women in science, women like Elizabeth Blackwell contributed to scientific knowledge through roles that weren't officially scientific, as illustrators, collectors, assistants. These roles gave women access to scientific work while maintaining the fiction that they weren't really doing science. Elizabeth's widowhood enabled her botanical work by making it economically necessary and giving her independence to pursue it. Her case shows how widowhood could open doors to intellectual work that married women couldn't access. Let's examine the lasting influence of widow rights on women's property rights. Generally, the legal rights that widows had to own property, make contracts, appear in court, were proof that women could exercise these rights competently. When reformers in the 19th century pushed for married women's property rights, they pointed to widows as examples. If widows could own property successfully, why couldn't married women? If widows could make contracts and conduct business, why did married women need coverture? If widows could appear in court and sue and be sued, why were married women legally non-existent? Widows demonstrated that the supposed reasons for denying married women legal rights, that women were intellectually incapable, that women needed male protection, that women couldn't handle legal and economic responsibilities, were false. The Married Women's Property Acts passed in Britain, 1870-1882, and in various American states throughout the 19th century, gradually gave married women rights that widows had always had. Married women gained the right to own property, to keep their own earnings, to make contracts, to sue and be sued. These reforms essentially extended widow rights to all women. This was revolutionary. For the first time, married women were legal persons rather than being covered by their husbands' legal identities. They could own property that their husbands couldn't automatically control. They had economic rights that gave them some independence even within marriage. The dangerous freedom that had been unique to widows became available to all women, but change was slow and incomplete. Even after Married Women's Property Acts, social pressure on women to defer to husbands remained strong. Women who exercised their legal rights too assertively faced social consequences. Legal equality didn't immediately translate to practical equality. The struggle that widows had fought to exercise legal rights against social pressure and institutional resistance continued for all women throughout the 20th century and into the 21st. The widows who insisted on their rights, who fought legal battles, who resisted pressure to surrender their autonomy, they paved the way for later reforms. Every widow who successfully defended her property rights demonstrated that women could exercise legal rights independently. Every widow who ran a business proved that women could engage in commerce. Every widow who resisted remarriage showed that women could survive and even thrive without male control. Their collective resistance made later feminist reforms imaginable and achievable, according to research by legal historian Dr. Norma Bash on married women's property acts. Widow rights provided both a model and a justification for extending property rights to married women. Reformers argued that if widows could exercise these rights successfully, there was no reason to deny them to married women. The long history of widow property ownership demonstrated that women's supposed incapacity for legal and economic responsibility was ideological fiction rather than natural fact. Widows' dangerous freedom eventually became all women's legal right, though the struggle to exercise those rights fully continues. Now let's reflect one final time on what this history means for us today. The fear of independent women that drove the persecution of widows, accusations of witchcraft, forced remarriage, property seizures, social ostracism, violence, persists in subtler forms. Women who don't marry are still questioned about their choices. Women who prioritize careers over family are still criticized. Women who are sexually autonomous are still judged more harshly than men. Women with power are still seen as threatening rather than admirable. But the progress is real. Women today have legal rights that took centuries to achieve. We can own property regardless of marital status. We can make contracts, conduct business, sue and be sued in our own names. We have economic and legal autonomy that our ancestors fought for. The dangerous freedom that widows claimed, the freedom to govern themselves, to control property, to make decisions, is now every woman's legal right. We honor the widows of history by using the rights they fought for. We honor them by being independent, by controlling our own lives, by refusing to accept that being female means accepting subordination. We honor them by remembering their stories, the women who resisted pressure to remarry, who fought legal battles for their property, who insisted on their autonomy, despite all costs. We honor them by continuing their struggle, fighting for complete equality in areas where legal rights haven't yet translated to social reality. The widows who valued dangerous freedom over safe subordination, who chose independence even when it meant poverty, struggle, persecution, they were revolutionaries. They challenged the fundamental structure of patriarchal society simply by existing as autonomous women. They refused to accept that women needed male control. They proved through their lives that women could govern themselves. Their legacy is the freedom we have today. Their struggle continues in our ongoing fight for equality. Remember them, sweet dreams, and may you wake tomorrow grateful for the legal rights that widows fought to maintain, for the recognition that women's capacity for independence isn't limited by marital status, for the gradual progress toward equality that began partly with widows insisting on their legal rights against all attempts to take them away. The widows throughout history who valued dangerous freedom over safe subordination, remember them. Their struggle brought the rights we take for granted. Their insistence that women could govern themselves, manage property, and make decisions eventually helped to change laws that gave married women the rights widows always had. Good night.